In the quiet space where water falls and the mind becomes still, there is a forgotten truth about human presence. It is not force that opens hearts, nor argument that bends attention, but a certain calm alignment within oneself, like a lake so clear that even the moon feels invited to rest upon it. There is a practice, simple on the surface, yet deep in its inward meaning. It is called the shower ritual, not of cleansing the body alone, but of refining the energy you carry into the world. For when a person steps into the flow of water with awareness, something subtle begins to change. The noise of yesterday dissolves. The tension of proving oneself softens. And in that quiet steam, a different kind of presence is born. Most people walk into their day already crowded within. Thoughts of fear, comparison, urgency, and resistance sit heavily on their shoulders. And so when they meet others, they are not truly present, they are carrying a storm disguised as a smile. In such a state, words become heavy and intentions feel forced. People sense this even without understanding it, and naturally they pull away. But when one learns to release this inner weight, even briefly, something remarkable begins to unfold. In the ritual, imagine the water as memory itself. Each drop is not just falling on skin, but carrying away invisible dust, the need to impress, the fear of rejection, the habit of chasing approval. As the body relaxes, the mind follows. And in that surrender, a rare clarity emerges. You are enough without effort, complete without performance, present without disguise. This is the first secret of true charisma, not to become more, but to remove what is unnecessary. When you step out from such awareness, you do not walk into the world seeking attention. You walk as someone already at peace. And peace in its quiet power is deeply noticeable. It does not demand respect, it naturally invites it. It does not chase connection, it becomes the ground where connection grows. People are not drawn to pressure, they are drawn to ease. They are not convinced by force, they are softened by authenticity. And so when your presence carries no inner struggle, others feel something rare in you, a space where they do not need to defend themselves. This is why certain individuals enter a room and conversations begin to shift without effort. It is not their voice alone, but the absence of inner conflict that speaks louder than words. There is no urgency in their gestures, no desperation in their gaze. Instead, there is a quiet certainty, as if they are already whole. The shower ritual becomes a reminder of this state. As water touches the body, it teaches impermanence. Everything that clings eventually falls away. And so why hold on to tension that does not belong to you? Why carry yesterday's judgments into today's interactions? In this awareness, you begin to speak differently, not to impress but to express, not to win approval but to share understanding. Your words become lighter yet more meaningful. Your silence becomes comfortable, not awkward, and in that balance, people feel safe around you. For charisma is not loudness, it is safety. When others feel safe in your presence, they lower their defenses, not because they are convinced but because they are at ease. And in ease, openness naturally arises. This is the quiet law of human connection. What is calm becomes magnetic. But there is another layer to this ritual. As you stand under the water, observe your breath. Notice how it arrives without invitation and leaves without permission. In this rhythm lies a teaching. Nothing valuable is controlled through force. It flows. It adjusts. It responds. When you bring this understanding into daily life, you stop trying to dominate conversations. You begin to listen more deeply. And in listening, something shifts. People feel seen, and being seen is one of the rarest gifts in human experience. In this way, your presence becomes a mirror where others recognize their own thoughts more clearly. And when people feel understood, resistance dissolves naturally. Not because you pushed it away, but because it no longer has a place to stand. This is often mistaken for influence over others. But in truth, it is simply alignment within yourself. When you are not divided inside, you no longer project division outward. Step by step, this practice refines not only your mornings but your interactions. A pause before speaking becomes natural. A softness in tone becomes effortless. A deeper awareness of timing emerges. You begin to sense when to speak and when silence carries more meaning. And slowly something shifts in how the world responds to you. Not because the world has changed, but because you are no longer meeting it with tension. The greatest illusion is that charisma is something added. In truth, it is something uncovered. Like a polished surface hidden beneath layers of dust, it was always there waiting for stillness to reveal it. So when you stand under the flow of water, remember, you are not only washing the body, you are returning to simplicity. You are removing the noise that makes you forget your natural state. And when you carry that simplicity into the world, something subtle yet undeniable happens. People do not feel pushed by you. They feel drawn to you, not because you demand their attention, but because you no longer scatter yours. In that quiet balance, interaction becomes effortless. Words land softer, presence becomes fuller, and connection, instead of being chased, begins to unfold on its own. This is the essence of the ritual, not control, not strategy, but clarity. And from clarity arises a presence that does not need to announce itself, yet is never ignored. Charisma comes from inner stillness, not force. True influence is not about trying harder or impressing others, but about removing inner tension and becoming naturally calm and present. True charisma does not begin with speaking, performing, or trying to be noticed. It begins in a quieter place long before you meet another person. It begins in the way you sit with yourself when no one is watching, in the way your thoughts settle or scatter, and in the way you carry the weight of your own mind. When the inner world is crowded, the outer presence becomes heavy. When the inner world becomes still, the outer presence becomes naturally light. This is why forceful effort often fails where simple calm succeeds. Most people misunderstand influence. They believe it is something you project outward, something you build through techniques, expressions, or carefully chosen words. But true influence is not constructed like a structure, it is revealed like the morning light when the fog disappears. If there is too much noise within, no amount of external effort can create genuine ease. People may listen, but they will not feel at peace in your presence. And without peace, connection remains shallow. Inner stillness is not something dramatic. It is not the absence of thought nor the rejection of life's complexity. It is the absence of unnecessary struggle with those thoughts. It is the moment you stop arguing with every feeling that arises. When anger appears, you do not feed it with more anger. When fear appears, you do not multiply it with imagination. Instead, you observe it like passing weather, allowing it to move through without building a home inside you. In this simple non-resistance, energy that was once scattered begins to return to its source. From this return, something subtle begins to shift in how you carry yourself. Your movements slow down, not from laziness, but from awareness. Your words become fewer, not from hesitation, but from clarity. You no longer feel the need to fill every silence, because silence no longer feels like emptiness. It feels like space. And in that space, others can finally breathe around you. When a person is driven by inner tension, every interaction becomes slightly rushed. There is an invisible urgency to be accepted, understood, or validated. Even kindness becomes slightly transactional. People sense this urgency instinctively. They may not define it, but they feel it as pressure. And pressure, no matter how well hidden, always creates distance. But when a person is free from this internal urgency, something very different happens. They enter conversations without hidden demand. They speak without trying to control the outcome. This absence of inner negotiation creates a kind of openness that others rarely encounter. In such presence, people do not feel evaluated, they feel received. This is where real charisma quietly grows. Not in the performance of confidence, but in the absence of inner conflict. When you are not split between what you are and what you wish to appear as, your presence becomes unified. And unity is always felt by others, even without words. It carries a sense of reliability, a sense of groundedness that makes people relax without knowing why. Even your silence begins to communicate something powerful. It no longer feels awkward or empty, but complete. In that completeness, others are not pushed away, they are invited to be themselves. And when people can be themselves around you, resistance naturally dissolves. There is no need to convince, no need to chase, no need to prove. The energy that once went into trying can now rest in simply being. Over time, this way of being becomes effortless. You no longer remember what it feels like to constantly perform for approval. Instead, you begin to notice how much energy was previously wasted in subtle forms of tension, overthinking words, imagining judgments, rehearsing conversations. As that tension fades, your presence becomes lighter, but also more grounded. You are not less expressive, you are more precise. You are not less engaged, you are more present. And in this quiet transformation, something remarkable unfolds. People begin to respond differently, not because you have learned new tricks, but because you have stopped interfering with your natural state. They feel less resistance around you, less pressure, more ease. And ease is deeply attractive to the human mind because it reminds it of something it constantly forgets, the possibility of peace in interaction. In the end, inner stillness is not a strategy for influence. It is a return to simplicity. And in that simplicity, presence becomes its own form of communication, silent, steady, and undeniably felt. The shower ritual symbolizes mental and emotional cleansing. Water represents release, washing away stress, ego, fear of judgment, and the need for approval, so the mind becomes clear and light. When stillness becomes your inner foundation, something subtle begins to reshape the way you relate to others. You no longer enter conversations as someone trying to achieve an outcome, but as someone who is already complete in themselves. This shift may appear small from the outside, but internally it is profound. The mind that once constantly calculated how it was being perceived begins to loosen its grip, and in that loosening, a more natural way of being starts to emerge. Most human interactions are quietly shaped by invisible tension. People speak not only to express, but to be accepted. They listen not only to understand, but to respond in a way that protects their image. Even silence is often filled with internal dialogue about what should be said next. This constant inner movement creates friction. And where there is friction, there is distance, even if words appear polite on the surface. But when inner stillness begins to take root, this pattern slowly breaks. You start to notice that you are no longer rushing to fill gaps in conversation. You are no longer afraid of pauses. In fact, silence begins to feel natural, even comfortable. This is because silence is no longer interpreted as rejection or failure. It is simply space where nothing is forced and everything is allowed to breathe. In this state, listening becomes deeper. Not the kind of listening that waits for its turn to speak, but a full presence that actually receives what the other person is saying. You begin to hear not just words, but the emotions behind them, the hesitation behind sentences, the meaning between expressions. And when people feel truly heard, something softens in them. They no longer feel the need to defend themselves as strongly. They become more open without being pushed. This openness is where natural connection begins. It is not created through persuasion or technique, but through the absence of inner resistance. When you are not internally blocking others with judgment or expectation, they feel it. Human beings are sensitive to emotional pressure, even when it is unspoken. And when that pressure disappears, trust begins to grow on its own. As this trust develops, your presence starts to feel different to others. They may not be able to describe it clearly, but they experience it as ease. Being around you feels less complicated. There is no sense of competition, no hidden agenda in every exchange. This simplicity is rare, and because it is rare, it becomes deeply noticeable. At the same time, your own expression becomes more precise. You stop using extra words to prove a point. You stop over-explaining your thoughts out of fear of misunderstanding. Instead, you speak when there is something meaningful to say, and you allow silence when there is nothing necessary to add. This balance makes your communication more impactful, not less, because what is spoken from clarity carries more weight than what is spoken from anxiety. Even your emotional reactions begin to change. Situations that once triggered immediate response now meet a brief pause. In that pause, awareness steps in before reaction. This does not mean emotions disappear, it means they are no longer driving every action blindly. And when emotions are observed rather than obeyed instantly, they lose their intensity over time. This creates a steadier presence, one that is not easily shaken by external shifts. People naturally gravitate toward this steadiness, not because it is loud or attention-seeking, but because it feels safe. In a world where most interactions are filled with subtle tension, encountering someone who carries none is deeply refreshing. It allows others to relax without effort, and when people relax, they open up. They speak more honestly. They respond more warmly. They engage more naturally. In this way, what began as an inner practice of stillness becomes an outer expression of quiet influence. Not influence through control, but influence through presence. Not by doing more, but by interfering less. And as this way of being deepens, life begins to feel less like a struggle to be noticed, and more like a natural unfolding where connection happens without force and understanding arises without demand. People respond more to energy than words. Others sense your inner state. When you are relaxed and authentic, people feel safe around you, which naturally draws them closer. As inner stillness deepens, something even more subtle begins to unfold in your daily life. Your relationship with timing changes. You no longer feel the same urgency to respond instantly to every situation, every message, every emotional pull. Instead, a natural pause appears between stimulus and response. In that pause, awareness grows stronger than reaction. And in that space, your choices begin to shift from impulsive to conscious. This change is not dramatic, but it is powerful. In the past, you may have noticed how quickly the mind tries to fill silence, defend identity, or correct misunderstandings immediately. It reacts as if every moment is a test that must be passed instantly. But when stillness becomes familiar, you begin to see that not every moment requires immediate action. Some moments simply require observation, some require patience, and some resolve themselves without interference at all. This understanding transforms how you move through conversations. You stop interrupting the natural flow of interaction with unnecessary urgency. Instead of rushing to prove your point, you allow ideas to settle. You begin to trust that truth does not need pressure to be understood. It reveals itself more clearly when given space. And when you speak from this space, your words carry a different quality, less scattered, more centered, more intentional. In this state, even disagreements begin to feel different. Where before there may have been resistance or emotional tightening, there is now room to listen fully without immediately opposing. This does not mean you lose your perspective or become passive. It means you are no longer controlled by the need to defend your identity in every exchange. You can hear opposing views without feeling threatened by them. And because you are not threatened, your response becomes clearer and more balanced. This balance creates a quiet strength in your presence. People often mistake strength for intensity, but true strength is not loud. It is stable. It does not need to dominate a room to be felt. Instead, it holds its ground without effort. When others encounter this kind of presence, they unconsciously adjust. They may slow down, speak more thoughtfully, or soften their tone. Not because they are being controlled, but because they feel a different rhythm in the interaction, one that is not driven by tension. Over time, this rhythm becomes your natural way of being. You no longer switch between different social masks or adjust yourself excessively depending on who is in front of you. There is a growing consistency in how you show up. This consistency does not make you rigid, it makes you reliable. People begin to sense that what they see is what is actually there, not a performance shaped by circumstance. At the same time, your emotional energy becomes more conserved. Situations that once drained you begin to pass without leaving heavy residue. This is because you are no longer resisting every uncomfortable feeling that arises. You allow emotions to move through without building long stories around them. And when emotions are not continuously reinforced, they lose their grip more quickly. This release of inner resistance has a noticeable effect on your interactions. You are no longer trying to manage how every moment is perceived. Instead, you are present with what is actually happening. This presence removes the hidden layer of pressure that often exists in communication. And when pressure is removed, authenticity becomes more visible. People respond strongly to authenticity even if they cannot explain why. They feel less guarded around it. They feel less need to analyze your intentions. There is a sense that nothing is being hidden or forced. This creates a natural openness in dialogue where exchanges feel more honest and less performative. As this way of being continues to develop, you may notice that relationships begin to simplify. Some connections deepen naturally because they are based on sincerity rather than effort. Others fade without conflict because there is no longer energetic tension sustaining them. What remains feels more aligned, more peaceful, and less complicated. And in this simplicity, something powerful emerges. You begin to realize that influence does not come from effortful expression, but from the quality of your inner state. When the inner world is steady, the outer world responds differently. Not because you are controlling it, but because you are no longer distorting it with unnecessary tension. Authenticity creates effortless connection. Speaking from clarity instead of pressure makes your communication lighter, more genuine, and easier for others to trust and accept. As this inner transformation continues to mature, your sense of identity itself begins to soften. What once felt like a fixed image that needed to be protected or projected starts to feel more fluid. You no longer cling as tightly to how you are perceived because the need for constant validation begins to lose its importance. Instead of asking, "How am I appearing right now?" the mind slowly shifts toward a quieter awareness. What is actually true in this moment? This subtle change may seem small, but it deeply reshapes the quality of your presence. When identity is rigid, every interaction becomes slightly tense. There is always a background effort to maintain an image, to avoid mistakes, to ensure approval is not lost. This creates unconscious strain in speech, posture, and even silence. But when identity becomes flexible, that strain begins to dissolve. You are no longer performing a version of yourself, you are simply responding to life as it unfolds. And in this responsiveness there is ease. This ease is often misunderstood by others as confidence, but it is something deeper than confidence. Confidence can still contain effort. It can still be something built or displayed. But ease arises when there is no internal resistance to simply being as you are. It is not an addition to personality, it is the absence of inner conflict. And because there is no conflict, your presence becomes more open and less defensive. In this openness, communication changes naturally. You stop overloading your words with unnecessary explanation. You no longer feel the need to justify every thought or defend every perspective. Instead, you allow clarity to guide expression. When something is clear, you speak it simply. When something is uncertain, you acknowledge it without discomfort. This honesty creates a rare sense of transparency in your interactions. People are deeply sensitive to this kind of transparency. They may not consciously analyze it, but they feel it immediately. Around such a presence, there is less emotional guessing, less hidden tension, and less social friction. Conversations begin to flow more naturally because there is less effort to decode hidden motives. What is expressed feels direct but not harsh, simple but not shallow. At the same time, your ability to perceive others also becomes more refined. When your own internal noise reduces, you begin to notice subtler layers in people's behavior. You see hesitation that is not spoken, comfort that is not verbalized, and discomfort that hides behind polite language. This awareness does not make you judgmental, it makes you more understanding. You begin to realize that most people are also carrying invisible pressure, just expressed in different forms. With this understanding, your responses become gentler without becoming weak. You no longer react to surface behavior alone. Instead, you respond to the human being beneath it. This shift changes the emotional tone of your interactions. Even difficult conversations lose some of their sharpness because you are no longer meeting resistance with resistance. You are meeting it with awareness. As this awareness stabilizes, your presence begins to carry a kind of quiet authority. Not authority based on position or dominance, but authority based on steadiness. People may find themselves listening more carefully when you speak, not because you are louder, but because there is no unnecessary disturbance in your expression. Your words feel considered even when spoken spontaneously. This steadiness also changes how you handle uncertainty. Instead of rushing to resolve every unknown, you become more comfortable allowing things to unfold. You begin to see that not all clarity comes immediately and not all answers need to be forced. This patience creates space for better decisions because they are no longer driven by urgency. Over time, life itself begins to feel less fragmented. Experiences are no longer divided into constant wins and losses, approvals and rejections. Instead, they are seen as a continuous flow of learning and adjustment. This reduces emotional volatility and increases resilience. You are less shaken by temporary outcomes because your sense of stability is no longer dependent on them. In this state, influence is no longer something pursued. It becomes a natural byproduct of presence. People are drawn not to effort but to the absence of unnecessary effort. They respond not to performance but to authenticity. And authenticity, when it is no longer forced, becomes quietly powerful. Real charisma is an uncovered natural state. It is not something added from outside but revealed when mental noise is reduced, allowing your natural presence, confidence and ease to shine through. As this journey of inner refinement reaches a deeper layer, even the idea of trying to be charismatic begins to fade away. There is a subtle realization that charisma was never something to be built or achieved in the first place. It was always a natural expression of a mind that is not divided against itself. When the inner world is no longer in conflict, the outer expression does not need effort to appear compelling. It simply becomes clear, steady, and quietly influential. At this stage, you begin to notice how much of human behavior is driven by unconscious tension. People often speak not just to communicate, but to secure their place, to avoid rejection, or to maintain an image. This creates a hidden layer beneath most interactions where words carry more than their surface meaning. But when you are no longer operating from that same tension, you stop participating in that invisible struggle. You are present without trying to win anything from the moment. This absence of hidden agenda changes everything. Conversations become lighter, not because topics are simple, but because the emotional weight behind them has been reduced. You are no longer trying to steer every exchange toward a desired outcome. Instead, you allow the interaction to unfold naturally. This surrender to the present moment is not weakness, it is clarity without interference. In this clarity, listening becomes one of your strongest expressions. You are no longer preparing your next sentence while the other person is still speaking. Your attention is fully available. And when attention is fully available, people feel it immediately. They feel that they are not being partially heard, not being evaluated, not being rushed. They feel received. And being received without judgment is one of the rarest experiences in human interaction. As a result, people begin to open up more easily around you. Not because you are asking them to, but because the space you create allows it naturally. There is no pressure in your presence, no subtle demand to behave in a certain way. This absence of pressure creates safety, and in safety people reveal more of themselves without resistance. This is where deeper connection begins to form, not through effort but through ease. At the same time, your own inner reactions continue to become more transparent to you. You start to see how quickly the mind once used to jump into interpretation, judgment, or defense. Now, there is more space before reaction arises. In that space, you can choose whether to respond or simply observe. This freedom changes the quality of your emotional life. You are no longer pulled so easily into unnecessary inner storms. With this stability, your words begin to carry more precision. You do not speak less out of suppression, but out of discernment. You sense more clearly when speech is needed and when silence communicates more than words ever could. This balance makes your communication more impactful because it is no longer diluted by excess or anxiety. People often misinterpret this kind of presence as something mysterious or exceptional. In reality, it is the result of subtraction, not addition. It is what remains when constant mental interference is reduced. When you stop over-editing yourself internally, what remains is something simple, direct, and grounded. And that simplicity is what others experience as natural authority. Over time, you also begin to notice that your relationships reorganize themselves without force. Some connections deepen because they are based on genuine resonance rather than effort. Others naturally fade because they were sustained mainly by tension, expectation, or habit. There is no need to aggressively manage these changes. They unfold on their own when unnecessary resistance is no longer feeding them. In this unfolding, life feels less like a performance and more like a conversation with reality itself. You are no longer constantly trying to control every outcome. Instead, you are participating fully while allowing space for uncertainty. This balance between engagement and acceptance creates a grounded presence that is neither passive nor forceful. And in that groundedness, something becomes very clear. Influence does not come from trying to be powerful. It comes from no longer being internally scattered. When the mind is unified, presence becomes coherent. And when presence is coherent, people feel it immediately, not as pressure, but as ease, clarity, and quiet strength that does not need to announce itself.